We have a brand new 6th gen 4Runner behind us, and we're going to be throwing on our full aluminum skid plates. There should be 3 main pieces, and then there should be hardware. So make sure to check with the PDF and make sure you have all of those bolts before you start working on this. And we're going to move over to the vehicle and remove the stock skid plate. All right, we have 4 bolts holding on this cardboard they call a skid plate. All right, this is a base model SR5, so there is only that one on here. You may have aluminum ones like on the TRD. So there might be a couple other bolts back here, but they should all be 12 millimeter. So we're gonna pull all those off and then we can just start throwing on our skid plates. All right, before we throw our skid plates on, we're gonna come over to the driver's side of the vehicle, and there's a square hole right here, and it's right behind the transfer case. And then there's this plastic cover, so I'm just gonna take a screwdriver and get it under there. And then you can pry it out. And from here, we're gonna feed in our square nut, and we'll run a bolt up through it. All right, I have 6 bolts here. These are all M8 bolts. We have 4 that are the same length, and then there should be a couple that have these shanks on them. I'm gonna throw some anti-seize on them since they are going up into the frame of the vehicle. And then we'll move over and lift up our main front piece and bolt it on. All right, now that I got the skid plate lined up, the shorter ones are gonna be the 2 rear and the 2 front. So I'm gonna start these by hand. All right, these bolts should be a 13 millimeter. I'm not gonna tighten them down all the way, but I am gonna run them up pretty close to the skid plate so it'll hold it pretty close to where it's supposed to be. And then we'll start working on bolting all the other pieces together. All right, sorry the audio did cut out, but all I'm describing right here is you have that lip that'll sit on top of the other skid plate. So we'll just set that up on top of that and use the transmission jack to hold the skid plate up against the vehicle. And then we're gonna take Allen button bolts that thread into this. These are a 7/32 head. And again, I'm gonna run these in pretty close, but I'm not gonna tighten them down. That just allows us a little wiggle room to get all the skid plates bolted up and lined up good. All right, next is our transfer case skid plate. And these are gonna use some carriage bolts. So there's a 4.5 one and then a 4-inch one. The longer ones go on the outside holes, and then the shorter ones go on the inside. This skid plate should slide over top of this rear one like that. And then we'll get a shot of us bolting this all together. All right, on these outside bolts, we have some 3/8 washers that we'll throw on top, and then the nylon locking nut. On the inside one, we're gonna be using these thick strut washers, so make sure you get those right. All right, next we have our little pigtail thing here, and We have these nuts that just clip into it. So you push one side in and then you can pry the other in. And then you're gonna bend it so that you can fish it in through the frame on that hole right there, and then line it up down here so we can run a bolt through. So I just like to hold it up next to it and then kind of eyeball it and get a rough estimate of where it needs to go. And then once we've bent it in the correct orientation, and then we can go along on the excess and you can just bend it to break it. All right, now that we got our skid plate all up in place and all our bolts installed, now we can go through and start tightening these down for final install. And then after we've gotten all that done, then we'll throw in these little trap doors that we have. All right, the last part is these two trap doors. There should be one with a bend in it, and it'll only go on one way. So make sure you line that up right, and then the flat one will go back here. These are countersunk Allen bolts, and they are 3/16, and I threw some anti-seize on them to prevent corrosion. All right, there it is. The skid plate's installed on our 6th Gen 4Runner. The TRD gray looks really great on this vehicle. If you have any questions about it, remember to leave them in the comments below, and we'll see you out on the trails.